So, let's start writing. By analogy to what we said before, we have this portfolio here. What is my omega 1? It's going to be minus because it's a bond, correct? And B because it's the notional of the bond. Okay. Now this sigma squared, by the way, now it's not in percent because just the very presence of this IRS means that percent makes no sense. IRS is something with zero value and lots of risk. So the concept of risk as a percent of value makes no sense. So this is now in euro squared. Okay? So this thing here, it is notional amount, this is euros now, okay? Times duration is 10. Okay? At par, which is 100 over 100 times 1 over 10,000. Okay, this is omega 1. Okay? What is omega 2? This is omega 1, let's call it. This is my old omega 1. What is omega 2? It's the plus or minus. Remember, it's an interest rate swap.
That's the plus for the...
It's, since I pay fixed, it's plus. So it's plus. What is it? Notional amount for the swap. Okay? Times 7 times 100 over 100. The swap is at zero cost. Okay? And we'll always assume swaps are at zero cost, because otherwise it gets complicated. Not only do you have a value for the swap, which complicates things, what you also have is the sensitivity of the swap is not exactly like the sensitivity of the bond, because the swap becomes a bond plus an annuity. The benefit you get from the swap, because it's not an upfront benefit, it's a benefit that comes out of, cash flows in the future. This benefit itself has interest rate sensitivity. It gets really complicated. So we assume swaps are at zero cost. Notional amount of the swap times 7 times 1 over 1,000. Oh, sorry, 1 over 10,000. Okay, this is my omega 2, correct? Okay. What does my variance covariance matrix look like? I said my 10-year interest rate's at 5%. Does this enter this 5% into my variance covariance matrix?
What do you ask?
I say 10-year, my variance covariance matrix now. Okay?
Yes.
What is really my risky? What's my risky parameter here? The interest rates. Okay? Now, you notice something. The very fact that my 10-year rate is 5%, my 7-year rate is 3%, it tells me that my curve is not flat. Okay? The very fact that these volatilities are not equal, it tells me that it doesn't just go up and down. Okay? It can flex. And the very fact that this is not 1, it tells me that I can also reverse, that movements can reverse direction. I can have the 7-year going up, the 10-year going down, can bend. So this is a pretty realistic, actually, depiction of interest rates. That's what interest rates look like. Okay? So the interest rate factor relevant to my 10-year bond, it's my 10-year interest rate. So my sigma 1, in this case, It's the standard deviation of the 10-year interest rate expressed in basis points. That's why I have the 1 over 10,000 here. So this is 50 squared. My sigma 2 squared, my 7-year interest rate, 40 basis points. Okay, 40 squared. And here it is my 0.9 times 40 times 50. And here's my 0.9 times 40 times 50. And it's again these things, my omega 1. So this is it. This is what this matrix formulation of my variance covariance matrix would look for interest rate, securities, and derivatives. And check this out. Item 1 is a security. Item 2 is a derivative. Okay? I make no distinction. I can accommodate securities and derivatives with exactly the same way. Because I have now decoupled value from contribution to risk. Okay, so this is what it would look like. We are going to see a very concrete example in the assignment that you will do. And these assignments, keeping up with the tradition of the previous class, essentially you can submit it and resubmit it, and we discussed in class, so it's not out to, eliminate people from the grades. It's there to be done. And we are going to discuss it, and you can always submit it and correct it.
Individually or in groups?
Let's say you can work in groups, but you have to sign it off individually. So if you have blind trust in somebody, you can... No, really, that's how you do it in real life. You learn to depend on the work of others. So it's a nice assignment. It's a good assignment, so it pays to do it. Okay. So let's take a step back on this. And already, this formulation here shows something. Ideally, if I have this bond, and I'm really afraid that interest rates are going to go up, okay, do I need a 7-year swap to do it? No, actually I need a 10-year swap. Because this swap, to begin with, in terms of actual cash flows, it will leave me exposed after the 7th year. And also in terms of value, even without the strange complications, even a parallel move of the interest rate curve by 100 basis points, this thing is going to be affected according to duration of 7, this thing is going to be affected according to duration of 10. So, I'm starting to think, maybe I should, try and hedge a little more for the swap, say 10 over 7 times more, so that at least I can keep my portfolio's duration matched. So a parallel move of interest rates up is going to affect this 10 times NB. This is going to affect 7 times NS, but NS is about 10 over 7 times NB. So it's going to raise it equally. We'll see that this may not be the optimal way to do things. And the way we're going to see this is through the following. Yes? We'll get this. The minimum variance hedge. Okay? In real life, perfect hedging is not always possible. Either because the thing I want to hedge against, my hedging instrument doesn't exist, my ideal hedging instrument, or my idea of hedging instrument may exist, but it may be too expensive. And when I say too expensive, I'm not saying it will have a large market value, because things have a market value of 0, by definition, when I go in. It could be that I'm being charged a very high entrance fee, a very high bid-offer spread, or a very high credit charge that somebody's charging me, you know, for my own credit risk. So it could be that the instrument of choice doesn't exist. How can I minimize my variance, okay, when the perfect hedging instrument doesn't exist? I'll very quickly, very simplified, forget all this formalism. In general, sigma squared, the variance is the notional amount. Then I'm talking about, say, dollar variance now, okay? I have things in euro squared, and when I talk about the hedged item and negative, imagine I have stocks, by analogy to the simple picture we had before. Imagine I have stocks, and I have my only hedging instrument I can have is my negative future position of the index. Okay, suppose I have, that's a good example. I have a stock.
What do you mean negative?
Future. So essentially I say, I have stock of Eurobank, say, and suddenly I don't like this stock very much, I think, actually that may be a good, no, I don't like this stock very much, okay? But I would incur a big offer spread if I want to sell it. Or it may be scarce, I may sell it now, and then when I really want to get it back, I may be priced out of the market. So I want to enter into an instrument which will compensate me if things go bad. Okay?
Go bad meaning?
Go bad meaning
stock
stocks lose value. So what do I say? I say I go into the futures market and I get into a short position on the futures index. Now, these things, they have notional amounts and risk profiles which are like quote-unquote negative stocks. Okay, so if I have, say, $1 million worth of stock, stocks go up 10%, I gain 100,000. If I go into $1 million worth of notional amount of short positions, if the index goes down 10%, I gain 100,000. Okay? The problem is, the stock I have is not the index. There is always a chance that I may lose from both positions because they're not perfectly correlated. Okay? The question is, statistically speaking, how much notional amount of index should I go short to hedge my long position in that stock? Okay. So generally speaking, my variance is my notional amount for the stock I have times the variance of the stock, as my notional amount of the index plus the variance of the index, plus 2 rho A. That just did the sum of two things. One of them is a negative position. Okay, so one of those ends, maybe I assume that may be negative. Okay, εύλογο είναι να πεις ότι one of them is negative, but I'm saying nothing. Okay, what do I want to do? I want to minimize this. I want to minimize this. Okay? So I differentiate. This is what I have, and this is what I want to get so that I minimize my variance. I differentiate with respect to NB. And then I set the derivative to 0. Okay? We'll not go through the whole differentiation, but what comes out is this, the following. Not any square. There's a mistake here. Please go in and it's minus NA. NB is minus NA.
Δεν τετράγωνο εκεί.
Okay, so
Δεν τετράγωνο εκεί.
then the dragon of course. I made a mistake. This thing doesn't exist. If you do the differentiation, you can see it. Essentially, this term does not carry anything to the MB, so it's outside differentiation. So let's take a look at this. Okay. First of all, I said it's reasonable to assume that NA is, if NB is positive, NA is negative. Okay. Is it 100% certain that if NB is positive, NA is negative? No. Why?
Because the negative something comes from the correlation.
Exactly. So it's reasonable to assume that for a positive stock, I need a positive stock holding, I need a negative position on the index if the index and the stock are positively correlated. Okay. If they are not, then this whole thing breaks down. Also, another thing that's pretty intuitive is that if I have something, okay, which is not very volatile, it has the correct characteristics, but it's not very volatile compared to the volatility of the thing I want to hedge, I need more of it. Okay? This is equivalent in this here, when we said my first choice may be to just go ahead and increase the notional of my 7-year swap. Okay? Because generally speaking, a 7-year swap is less volatile to changes in interest rates compared to a 10-year bond. Okay? Again, this is reasonable to assume it may not necessarily be 100% sure. Because a 7-year swap has shorter duration, but it could be that the 7-year interest rate is more volatile in itself. Okay? So this whole thing, we'll make an example, and it's going to be a little different when we talk about interest rates. Okay? That here, this was the second thing, the second observation. A third observation is, if these two things are uncorrelated, if this goes to 0, then how much hedging instrument should I? 0. Exactly. If this goes to 0, basically means if I, quote unquote, try to hedge, the only thing I'm doing is I'm inserting noise in my system. Okay. And the minimum variance, now this is something very interesting. If you just take this, plug it back in here, the minimum variance becomes the following. This is, what is this? This is the variance that I had. This is the variance of my original unhedged position times 1 minus rho AB. The minimum standard deviation, the square, the square root.
Can I ask something? In general, can we hedge something that is positively correlated with the thing we want to hedge?
No.
Okay.
No.
So this, in this case, the correlation is given that it's going to be negative.
No, wait a moment. I'm saying if I want to hedge something with something which is positively correlated, what I have, then I have to have negative notional amount.
Can we have a negative?
Yes, exactly. The futures markets exist because I have to have a negative notional amount. The futures markets exist because I want to have a quote-unquote anti-stock. I want to have a position where the stocks go down and I'm richer. How does this happen in practice? What if I borrow a stock sell it, and then wait to buy it back to give it back. At that time whereby I have borrowed the stock and sold it,
At a high price.
hmm?
At a high price.
I've sold it, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's at a high price. I hope it's at a high price. I've sold the stock. At that point, a drop in the value of stock increases my net worth because it decreases my liability. So suddenly I have created an anti-stock.
This is the short selling you
Mhm, yeah. Short selling or going into a short position in the future markets, it's the same direction. Generally, though, I short sell a stock, I go into a position in the future markets for the index. And stockbrokers, it's much more easier. It's much easier for them to borrow stocks and then create that index. So yeah, this is the minus sign. This is the minus sign. Exactly. I have to. Suppose I have Eurobank and I want to get rid of it, but I can't. But on the other hand, I can really easily borrow National Bank of Greece. Now what do? I could just go ahead, borrow this. That's the borrow, the minus sign. Borrow, sell it. At that point, a drop in the price of the National Bank of Greece will increase my net worth, and I hope that this will outweigh my decrease of net worth. But there's a big but. Take a good look at this equation here. Okay. Question: how much residual VAR is left if I try to hedge my risks optimally, but the hedge has only a 0.9% 0.9 correlation coefficient with hedge diamond? Ideally, if I have something which is fully correlated with a hedged item, okay? Even if it's not just as volatile, even if it's simply correlated, I will just hedge getting into a bigger position, okay? If this is one, I can still have a perfect hedge, even if the volatilities are different. I can just hedge more, okay? That's why sigma B is not a part of this thing here, okay? So instead of the ideal one, my hedge has only 0.9% correlation coefficient. How much of my original VAR remains after I hedged? It has a correlation of 0.9%. This is a great question, by the way, for CFA and FRM, and it's also, it comes shocking to people who haven't seen it, to management. Just do it. How much? Just do it. Let's do this. This is my original VAR. Let's say this. If my original VAR is proportional to this, correct? It's my original sigma. How much is this? 4.9. 1 minus how much?
10%.
No, you just do it. It's 1 minus 0.9 square, and then the square root of that. How much? It's pretty counterintuitive. I hedge, a 90% correlation is a pretty good one in the markets. I hedge something with a hedging instrument which is 90% correlated, and still 40% of my risk is with me.
I reduced 60% of my VAR.
I reduce 60% of my VAR, and 40% is still with me. Somehow, intuitively, even...
I was expecting 90%, let's say.
Exactly, I was expecting that 10% of my VAR would be with me. Since correlation is 0.9, it's not correct. 40% of my VAR is still with me. And this is a pretty good correlation coefficient, by the way. Say 5-year rates and 10-year rates, they've got correlation coefficient which is lower than that. Okay, now, no, don't worry, we're not trying to PCA now. Here.
Can I ask something?
Yes, please.
If this was negatively correlated, it would still be the same.
Negative 0.9.
Yeah.
Yes. Still the same thing. I would need to get a positive notional of this, okay, of equal magnitude, and then I would still be left with 40% of my original VAR. This is rho squared.
Yeah.
Obviously, this positive or negative correlation, I took care of it when I chose directions of my hedged item. This is rho squared. Okay.
NA, you said, and NB are the amount. NA and NB are
The amounts. If we're talking about
Okay.
stocks and the position of the index. Now, obviously, I mean, when you talk about interest rate instruments and swaps, you got a very, very similar framework. There you must be very careful though. What is NA? What is NB? Where does the duration enter? What are sigmas? So let's do the interest rate case. Okay, that's what we said when we discussed the class. I'll just leave it here. Okay, in this case here, okay?
Can I ask something?
Yes, please.
So are we looking for a very risky security in order to hedge something? A very risky we mean a high SB, for example, in this case formula.
Technically, yes. Technically, if you want to hedge something, you want to hedge it with something which is risky, of course, provided it has the correct correlation, technically, so that you just buy less of it.
Yeah.
In practice, though, single name risky securities, they have a very high idiosyncratic risk, which means it could be that your sigma is very big, but your rho is going to be very small. So it could be that if you try to use a risky security, even though the math might have worked, you will be introducing noise. Because generally risky securities, they are risky because they don't look like anything else.
Not have a low correlation.
Exactly. Now it could be that somebody would start looking at the efficient frontier and, you know, I'm sure people have thought of that before. You know, what's the trade-off between correlation with the market? You know, sigma. Now, let's go into the interest rate case. Okay? Just as we have this formula here, let's try and keeping this in mind, okay, see what my variance and what my minimum variance hedge would look like if I have a bond, a 10-year bond, and a 7-year swap. Okay? Let's see. Sigma squared in euros. Start. Sigma squared in euros. That's my dimension. In this case. Let's see first my bond. What would be my bond component? It would be this times that. You know, if you carry that out, the whole thing. So it would have been the following. The notional of the bond, okay, times the duration of the bond, times the price over a cathode, over 100 of the bond, times 1 over 1000 square. You remember that was my omega in the old days.
10,000 or 1,000? 10,000.
1 over 10,000. Επειδή, why? Because this volatility is going to be sigma interest rates, in this case sigma 10, okay, in basis points. So this is in euro, this is euro, this is dimensionless, this is dimensionless, this is dimensionless, this is basis points. I'm sorry, this is the duration of time, this is basis points, which is percent over time, so this is dimension of euros, okay? Plus, there's a plus again. What is my, for the swap, is, we said everything's in the part, times 1 over 10,000. Okay, sigma 7 squared. Okay, minus, in this case, the minus that we have here instead of the plus here, okay, means that already I have decided that since the interest rates of the bond and the interest rates of the swap, they may not be perfectly correlated, but it's highly unlikely they'll be anti-correlated, that if in the bond I receive fixed, in the swap I pay fixed. This is the minus here. Okay, but I've already said that my swap is a negative position, it's a negative bond position. Minus, now this whole thing, 2 times sigma 10 in basis points, sigma 7 in basis points. Rho, the rho is this 0.9 between the 10 and the 7. Okay. Rho. And B and S, D, B, D, S, P over 100 times 1 over 1,000. 1 over 1,000. Okay? This is it. This is the formula. The question is, given this, given my notional